Hi, my name's Delilah. I worked double shifts for 30 years to give my daughter everything I never had. When I lost my job at 58, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're a burden I can't afford. Pack your things." She had no idea I had $2.3 million sitting in offshore accounts. When I tried to explain, she slammed the door in my face. What happened next changed everything between us forever. But before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been judged by someone who thought they knew your whole story? Drop it in the comments, because by the end of this, you might see family loyalty very differently. Hold up. I'm curious where you're listening from, and if the story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. I never thought a Tuesday morning in October could shatter 30 years of sacrifice in under 5 minutes. But standing in the pristine kitchen of my daughter's townhouse in Maplewood Heights, watching her count out grocery money like I was a stranger begging for change, I realized how completely I'd miscalculated everything. My name's Delilah Cartwright. I'm 58, a former senior logistics coordinator for Hartwell Industries, and apparently, according to my only child, a financial parasite. For 3 decades, I'd worked my fingers raw in shipping warehouses, pulling double shifts, skipping meals, and sleeping 4 hours a night. Also, Rihanna could have violin lessons, designer clothes, and that private college education that cost more than most people's houses. But none of that mattered the morning she decided I'd become dead weight. Growing up, I was the daughter who got hand-me-downs and government cheese. My mother, Lorraine, worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on in our cramped apartment in Riverside District. I swore my child would never know that kind of struggle. I swore she'd never feel the shame of worn-out shoes or the hollow ache of watching other kids get things she could only dream about. I kept that promise. Maybe too well. Rihanna had grown into everything I'd hoped for her to become. Harvard Business School graduate, corner office at a prestigious consulting firm, married to a surgeon, living in a house that belonged in magazines. She was polished, confident, successful. Everything I'd never been allowed to be. But somewhere along the way, she'd also become someone I barely recognized. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday since I'd been staying with her. I'd been unemployed for 6 weeks after Hartwell Industries downsized their logistics department. At 58, finding new work wasn't exactly simple, especially when younger candidates with fresher degrees flooded every job posting. My savings were sufficient, but Rihanna didn't know that. She only saw an aging mother who'd lost her job and needed a place to land. I was making coffee in her spotless kitchen when she walked in, already dressed in her sharp business suit, phone pressed to her ear, discussing quarterly projections like the rest of the world existed solely for her convenience. She hung up and turned to me with that expression I'd learned to dread over the past weeks. The look that said I was an inconvenience she was trying to solve with minimal disruption to her perfectly ordered life. "Mom, we need to talk." I set down my mug, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter. "About what, sweetheart?" "About this arrangement. It's not working." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Rihanna pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like financial apps. "I've been running the numbers. Housing you, feeding you, covering your car insurance since you can't afford it anymore. It's costing us nearly $2,000 a month." I blinked. "Rihanna, you didn't have to ask. You're my mother. But the reality is, Trevor and I have our own financial goals. We're looking at investment properties, and frankly, supporting a dependent parent wasn't in our 5-year plan." The word dependent hit like a physical blow. I raised this woman. I sacrificed everything so she could stand in this kitchen and calculate my worth in dollars and cents. "I'm actively looking for work," I said quietly. "This is temporary." She sighed, the sound sharp with impatience. "Mom, let's be realistic. You're 58. You don't have a college degree. The job market isn't exactly friendly to people in your situation. And honestly, I can't keep subsidizing your lifestyle indefinitely." My lifestyle, as if I'd been living in luxury instead of sleeping on her guest room fold-out couch and eating whatever leftovers she deemed acceptable to share. "What do you mean?"
Rihanna's expression didn't soften. If anything, it became more businesslike, more clinical. I'm saying you need to figure out alternative arrangements. There are assisted living facilities that work with people on limited budgets. Social services can help you navigate the options. The room seemed to tilt. Assisted living? Rihanna, I'm not elderly or infirm. I just need time to find another job. Mother, you're being unrealistic. Even if you find work, what kind of job can you get without a degree? Retail? Food service? Minimum wage isn't going to support the lifestyle you're accustomed to. The lifestyle I'm accustomed to, I lived in a one-bedroom apartment and drove a 15-year-old Honda so you could have everything you want.
And I appreciate that. But your sacrifices don't entitle you to unlimited support from my family. Trevor and I work hard for what we have. We shouldn't have to compromise our financial security because you didn't plan adequately for your future. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt something inside me break, not with sadness, but with a clarity so sharp it cut. "Pack your things," she continued, checking her watch. "I'll give you until the weekend to make arrangements. I can loan you enough for a security deposit somewhere modest, but this can't continue." I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to tell her about the accounts she didn't know existed, the investments I'd quietly built while she assumed I was just another working-class woman living paycheck to paycheck. But looking at her face, so certain of my worthlessness, so convinced of her own superiority, I couldn't find the words. Instead, I nodded. "I understand." "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." She grabbed her briefcase and headed toward the door, pausing only to add, "Oh, and Mom, maybe this will be good for you. Force you to become more self-reliant." The front door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the kitchen that smelled like expensive coffee and broken promises. I sat down heavily at her granite breakfast bar, my hands shaking not from fear, but from rage. In my purse, my phone buzzed with a notification from my investment app. My portfolio had gained another $3,000 overnight. $2.3 million. That's what 30 years of secret discipline had built. Money she had no idea existed because I hidden it, protected it, grew it quietly while she assumed I was just another working-class woman living paycheck to paycheck. I'd planned to tell her someday, maybe when I retired, maybe when she had children of her own and understood sacrifice differently. I'd imagined her surprise, her pride, her realization that her mother wasn't the financial burden she'd always assumed. But sitting in that her shock or pride, I realized I no longer cared about either. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't planning my next move around what would make Rihanna's life easier. I wasn't calculating how to minimize my impact on her pristine world. I was finally free to be exactly who I had always been underneath the sacrificing, people-pleasing mother she'd never bothered to actually see. And what happened next was going to change everything between us forever. We poured our hearts into researching and telling this story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? I spent the first hour after Rihanna left sitting in stunned silence, staring at the granite countertop that probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months. The house felt different now. Not welcoming, not home, just expensive and cold. My phone buzzed again. Another investment notification. My cryptocurrency holdings had jumped another 2%. I almost laughed at the irony. While my daughter calculated the burden of feeding me, my digital wallet was earning more in a day than she spent on groceries in a month. But the laughter died in my throat when I realized something else. If Rihanna could dismiss me so easily now, what would happen if she ever found out about the money? Would she suddenly care? Would she want to reconcile? Or worse, would she feel entitled to it because of her Harvard education and her perfect life? I needed to understand how deep this went. How long had she seen me as a burden? Had she always been this calculating, this cold, or was this something new? I walked to her home office, a pristine room with built-in shelves and a desk that looked like it belonged in a CEO's corner office.
Her laptop was closed, but her tablet lay open on the side table, still logged in to her personal accounts. I hesitated. I'd never invaded my daughter's privacy before. But then I remembered her words, subsidizing your lifestyle, as if sleeping on a fold-out couch and eating her leftovers was some kind of luxury vacation. The first thing I found was a text thread with her husband Trevor from 3 weeks ago. Trevor: how much longer is your mom staying? Rihanna: I don't know. She's not even trying to find work. I think she expects to just live here indefinitely. Trevor: we talked about this. The guest room was supposed to be temporary. Rihanna: I know. She's gotten comfortable. I'm gonna have to be direct with her. Trevor: maybe it's time for tough love. She needs to understand we have our own priorities. My hands shook as I scrolled further. There were more messages, going back to the week after I'd moved in. Rihanna: she acts grateful, but I can tell she thinks this is what she owes me for all her sacrifices, like working a job entitles her to retirement support from us. Trevor: your parents' generation just had different expectations about family. Rihanna: different expectations about personal responsibility, you mean? She never went to college, never invested properly, never planned for anything beyond the next paycheck. Now she expects us to fix her mistakes. I set the tablet down before I threw it across the room. Mistakes? 30 years of working myself to the bone so she could have violin lessons and designer clothes were mistakes?
But there was more. I found email threads with her sister-in-law, Camille, discussing the mother situation, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person who'd raised her. Camille: can't you just be honest with her about your financial boundaries? Rihanna: I've tried to be subtle, but she's gotten used to the free ride. Free food, free housing. I even paid her car insurance last month. Camille: maybe she needs a wake-up call. Sometimes people don't become self-sufficient until they have to. Rihanna: exactly. I think I've been enabling her dependence. Trevor says I need to stop feeling guilty about having more than she does. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from rage so pure it made my chest tight. She felt guilty about having more than I did, as if her success existed in a vacuum, unconnected to every sacrifice I'd made to create it. I walked back to the kitchen and opened her laptop. The password was her birth date combined with Trevor's initials. Even her password was about her perfect life. Her banking app was still logged in. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The numbers made me dizzy. Joint checking account with Trevor, $47,000. Savings, $180,000. Investment accounts, $340,000. Monthly income, $28,000 combined. $500,000 in assets, $28,000 a month in income. And she was calculating the cost of letting her mother sleep on a fold-out couch? But then I found something else. A folder on her desktop labeled Estate Planning. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Legal papers about financial power of attorney, discussions with an elder law attorney about managing aging parents' assets. My blood went cold. There were no assets for them to manage, at least none they knew about. But the timeline was suspicious. The folder was created 2 months ago, right around when I'd first mentioned that layoffs might be coming at Hartwell Industries. I opened her browser history. Searches for financial responsibility for unemployed parents, legal obligations to support elderly parents, and how to protect your assets from family financial burdens. The last search made my stomach drop. Signs your parent is hiding money. I sat back in her expensive desk chair, mind racing. Had she suspected? Had I been too careful or not careful enough? The direct deposits from my investment accounts went to a bank across town, an institution I'd chosen specifically because it was nowhere near her usual locations. My mail went to a P.O. box. I had been meticulous about keeping my financial life separate.
But Rihanna was smart, Harvard-trained smart. If she'd been looking for signs, I called my financial advisor, Nathan Pierce. He answered on the second ring. Delilah? How are you holding up? I heard about the layoffs at Hartwell Industries. Nathan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has anyone been asking questions about my accounts? Making inquiries? A pause. What kind of inquiries? Family members. My daughter specifically. No, absolutely not. You know we have strict privacy policies. Why would you ask? I explained the situation. The dismissal, the searches on her computer. Nathan's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Delilah, he said finally, you need to protect yourself. If your daughter is researching elder financial abuse laws, she might be planning something more than just kicking you out. What do you mean? I mean, some people might see hidden assets as evidence that an older person is mentally incompetent, unable to manage their own finances. It could be grounds for seeking guardianship. The room spun. Guardianship? It's more common than you'd think. Adult children who assume their parents can't possibly have significant assets. When they discover money, they sometimes claim the parent is being taken advantage of or is mentally unfit to manage its income. I hung up and sat in Rihanna's office, surrounded by her degrees and awards and photos of her perfect life, finally understanding the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about her being embarrassed by her unemployed mother. This wasn't just about the cost of groceries and car insurance. She was positioning herself to take control of money she didn't even know existed yet. But I had been planning for 30 years, and unlike my daughter, I knew the difference between being prepared and being paranoid. I opened a new browser window and began researching something she probably never expected her uneducated mother to understand: asset protection trusts and legal precedents for financial elder abuse claims. If Rihanna wanted to play games with someone's financial future, she was about to learn that her mother was a much more skilled opponent than she ever imagined. The question was, how far was she willing to go to get control of money she thought I couldn't possibly have earned on my own? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to teach her exactly how wrong she had been about everything? I spent the next 2 days moving my belongings into a modest extended-stay hotel in Thornfield, about 20 minutes from Rihanna's neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could have afforded the penthouse suite at the Grand View Resort downtown, but the simple room with its basic furnishings suited my purposes better. I needed to think, to plan, and to decide exactly how I wanted to handle what was coming.
Because something was definitely coming. Nathan had been right about protecting myself. I'd spent hours on the phone with an attorney he'd recommended, a sharp woman named Joyce Kellerman, who specialized in elder financial protection cases. She'd reviewed everything I'd found on Rihanna's computer and confirmed my worst suspicions. "Your daughter is building a case," Joyce said bluntly. "The searches, the estate planning documents, the sudden urgency to remove you from her home. She's establishing a pattern that suggests you're financially irresponsible and potentially incompetent. But she doesn't even know about the money yet. That's what makes this dangerous. When she discovers it, she'll likely claim you've been hiding assets due to mental decline or that someone is manipulating you. The fact that she's already been researching guardianship options suggests she's planning to move quickly when she has evidence." I'd signed papers that morning, establishing additional legal protections for my assets and creating a clear paper trail of my mental competency. Joyce had also prepared documentation that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to claim I was being financially exploited or that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. Now I sat in my hotel room, staring at my phone, preparing to make a call I'd been avoiding for 2 days. I dialed Rihanna's number. "Mom?" She sounded surprised. "How are you settling in? Did you find a place?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm staying at the Thornfield extended stay while I look for something permanent." Oh, a pause. That must be expensive. It's manageable. I kept my voice neutral. I was calling because I wanted to invite you and Trevor to lunch this weekend. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you. What kind of things? Just some family matters, nothing urgent, but I think it's time we had an honest conversation. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, if this is about coming back to stay with us, I thought we were clear about that. The arrangement wasn't working. No, it's not about that. I respect your decision. This is about something else entirely. Can you give me a hint? I have a busy week, and I need to know if this is worth blocking out time. Worth blocking out time to have lunch with the mother who'd raised her. It's about your future security, I said carefully, and some opportunities that might interest you. I could practically hear her calculating on the other end. What kind of opportunities? The kind better discussed in person. How about Saturday? That new place downtown, Meridian Bistro? 1 o'clock? I suppose we could do that, but Mom, if you're thinking about asking us for money, Rihanna, I promise you, I will not ask you for a single dollar, in fact, quite the opposite. That seemed to intrigue her enough to agree. Saturday afternoon, I arrived at Meridian Bistro 15 minutes early, dressed in a way that would surprise my daughter. Not the tired warehouse clothes she was used to seeing, but a tailored navy dress and jacket that I'd owned for years, but never had occasion to wear. I'd had my hair professionally styled for the first time in months, and I carried a leather portfolio that contained documents she'd never seen before. Rihanna and Trevor arrived precisely on time, both looking like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. Rihanna wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I used to make in 2 weeks, and Trevor's watch caught the light in a way that suggested serious money. They approached the table with cautious smiles, the kind people wear when they're not sure what they're walking into. "Mom, you look different," Rihanna said, settling into her chair. "Nice. Thank you. I thought this conversation deserved some formality." Trevor shook my hand with the firm grip he probably practiced in business school. "Delilah, good to see you. Rihanna mentioned you wanted to discuss some family matters." "I do." I opened the portfolio and placed a single document on the table between us. "But first, I want to apologize." Rihanna blinked. "Apologize? For what?" "For not being completely honest with you about my financial situation." Their expressions shifted slightly. Trevor leaned forward. Rihanna's eyes narrowed with what looked like suspicion. "What do you mean?" she asked. I slid the document across the table. It was a summary statement from my investment portfolio, dated 3 days earlier. Rihanna picked it up, scanned it, and her face went completely pale. "This says you have over $2 million. $2.3 million as of Tuesday's close." Trevor grabbed the paper from her hands, his eyes moving rapidly across the numbers. "This has to be a mistake, or fake." I placed 3 more documents on the table. Bank statements, investment account summaries, and a letter from Nathan confirming the authenticity of all holdings. "It's not fake. It's the result of 30 years of living below my means, investing every spare dollar, and making financial decisions that prioritized long-term growth over short-term comfort." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Rihanna stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. "I don't understand," she said finally. "If you have this money, why did you let me think you were broke? Why did you move in with us like some kind of charity case?" The words stung, but I kept my voice level. "Because I lost my job and needed temporary housing while I figured out my next steps. The money's invested for my retirement and long-term security. I don't touch the principal for day-to-day expenses."
Trevor's expression had shifted from confusion to something harder to read. "So you've been sitting on millions while letting us pay your car insurance and buy your groceries?" "I never asked you to do either of those things." "But you didn't stop us," Rihanna said, her voice rising. "You let us believe you were destitute. You let me worry about your future, about what would happen to you if we couldn't support you." "Did you worry? Because the text messages I saw suggested something different." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Rihanna's face flushed red. "What text messages?" "The ones where you called me a burden, where you and Trevor discussed how I was subsidizing my lifestyle and needed tough love to become more self-reliant. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. Rihanna's jaw tightened. You went through my phone? I went through your computer, the one you left logged in while you were calculating the cost of my existence. That's a violation of privacy. So is researching guardianship options for an elder parent you assume is financially incompetent. The words hit like a physical blow. Rihanna's mouth opened, then closed. Trevor looked between us like he was watching a tennis match he didn't understand. I don't know what you're talking about, Rihanna said, but her voice lacked conviction. I placed one final document on the table, a printout of her browser history. The searches about elder financial abuse and asset management highlighted in yellow. Your research was quite thorough, especially the part about signs that elderly parents might be hiding money. The restaurant noise seemed to fade around us. Other diners continued their conversations, unaware that a 30-year relationship was imploding at table 12. You were planning to have me declared incompetent, weren't you? The sudden eviction, the documented concerns about my financial irresponsibility, you were building a case. Trevor found his voice first. Now hold on, that's quite an accusation. Is it? Then explain the estate planning folder. Explain the consultations with elder law attorneys. Explain why you felt entitled to research your mother's potential hidden assets. Rihanna's composure finally cracked. Because nothing about your behavior made sense. You worked a warehouse job your entire life, but never seemed actually desperate for money. You were always vague about your expenses, your savings, your plans. And then when you lost your job, you just accepted it, like it wasn't even a problem. So you decided to solve the mystery by having me declared mentally unfit? I decided to protect our family from whatever game you were playing. The words echoed across the table like a slap. I looked at this woman I'd sacrificed everything for, the stranger who shared my DNA but not my values, and felt something inside me finally break free from 30 years of maternal guilt. The only game being played here was by you. You calculated my worth in grocery bills and car insurance payments while planning to take control of money you had no idea I'd earned through decades of discipline you never even noticed. I stood up, gathering the documents. But here's what you failed to calculate, Rihanna. I don't need your approval, your support, or your guardianship. I never did. Where are you going? She asked, panic creeping into her voice for the first time. To live my life, the one I planned for and earned and deserve to enjoy, without explaining myself to someone who sees me as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. As I walked away from that table, leaving them sitting with their assumptions and their spreadsheets and their carefully calculated cruelty, I heard Rihanna call my name. I didn't turn around. Because for the first time in 30 years, I was walking toward something instead of away from it. And what I was walking toward was a future where my value wasn't determined by someone else's accounting. The phone calls started that same evening. 23 missed calls from Rihanna, 7 from Trevor, and a string of text messages that ranged from apologetic to demanding to threatening. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle I'd bought to celebrate my newfound freedom. But freedom, I was learning, came with its own complications. By Monday morning, Rihanna had escalated beyond phone calls. She appeared at my hotel, standing in the lobby in her power suit like she owned the place. The desk clerk called my room, her voice uncertain. Mrs. Cartwright, there's a woman here claiming to be your daughter. She says there's a family emergency. Tell her I'm not available. 20 minutes later, she was back. This time she'd brought reinforcements. Trevor waited by the elevators while a man I didn't recognize spoke quietly with the hotel manager. Rihanna approached the desk clerk again, this time with official-looking documents in her hand.
I watched from the mezzanine level, hidden behind a decorative pillar, as she made her presentation. Even from a distance, I could see the manager's expression shift from polite attention to genuine concern. They were trying to have me removed from the hotel. I called Joyce Kellerman immediately. "They can't do that," she said after I explained the situation. "Not without a court order or evidence of immediate danger. What kind of documents did they show?" I couldn't see clearly, but the hotel manager looked convinced.
"I'm coming over. Don't engage with them directly and don't sign anything." Joyce arrived within 30 minutes, striding through the lobby like she was heading into battle. I watched from my hiding spot as she approached the group by the front desk. The conversation was brief but animated. The unknown man handed her a business card. She examined their documents, made several phone calls, and within 15 minutes, Rihanna and her entourage were escorted out. Joyce found me in the hotel's small business center 20 minutes later. "Who was the third man?" I asked. "A private investigator named Marcus Holbrook. They hired him to build a case for emergency guardianship." My stomach dropped. Emergency guardianship? It's a legal mechanism designed to protect elderly people who are in immediate danger due to mental incapacity or exploitation. The problem is, it can be misused by family members who want quick access to assets. What kind of case were they trying to build? Joyce sat down across from me, her expression grim. "They documented your erratic behavior over the past week. The sudden move to an expensive hotel despite claims of financial hardship, the mysterious appearance of millions in assets that you allegedly never mentioned to family members, the refusal to communicate or explain your actions. Those aren't signs of mental incapacity. They're signs of someone who's finally had enough. I know that. You know that. But presented the right way to the right judge, it could look like evidence of cognitive decline or outside manipulation." The business center felt too small suddenly. What do I do? We fight back. But first, we need to understand exactly what they're planning. That afternoon, Joyce's own investigator discovered the scope of Rihanna's strategy. She'd filed preliminary paperwork for emergency guardianship, claiming I was showing signs of dementia and was being financially exploited by unknown parties. She'd provided sworn statements from Trevor and her sister-in-law Camille about my allegedly confused behavior and set in paranoid accusations against family members. Most damaging was a statement from Dr. Richard Pemberton, Rihanna's family physician, who claimed that during a recent conversation, Rihanna had expressed concerns about my mental state and ability to make sound financial decisions. The problem, Joyce explained, is that emergency guardianship hearings happen quickly, sometimes within 48 hours, and they're designed to err on the side of caution. If a judge believes there's any possibility that an elderly person is being exploited or is mentally compromised, they'll grant temporary guardianship first and ask questions later. How can they claim I'm being exploited when the money is in accounts I've had for decades? Because you never told your family about it. They're arguing that secrecy itself is evidence of either mental decline or outside manipulation. They're claiming someone convinced you to hide assets from your loving family who only wanted to help you. The twisted logic made my head spin. So being financially responsible and maintaining privacy is now evidence of incompetence? In the right courtroom, with the right narrative, it can be. That evening, I sat in my hotel room reviewing documents Joyce had prepared for our defense. Bank records dating back 30 years, investment statements showing careful, consistent contributions, letters from employers documenting my responsible handling of company finances, medical records proving my mental competency. But I knew documentation wouldn't be enough. Rihanna wasn't just fighting for control of my money anymore. She was fighting to control the narrative about who I was and what I was capable of. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning, 2 days to prepare for a battle that would determine whether I remained a free person or became my daughter's legal ward. Tuesday night, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rihanna's number. "Hello? Sweetheart? Mom?" Her voice was strained. "We need to talk." "I think we have said everything we needed to say." "No, we haven't.
I spoke to Joyce Kellerman. I know you're planning to fight the guardianship petition. Of course I'm planning to fight it. You're trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so you can control money I earned through 30 years of hard work? That's not what this is about. Then what is it about, Rihanna? A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different, colder. If you won't listen to reason, then we'll see you in court tomorrow. Yes, you will. After she hung up, I called Joyce.
How confident are you about tomorrow? I asked. Honestly, it depends on the judge. Emergency guardianship laws are written to protect vulnerable elderly people, which means they favor caution over individual rights. But we have strong documentation of your competency and your daughter's financial motives. And if we lose? Then your assets get frozen while a court-appointed guardian reviews your financial affairs. It could take months to undo, and there's no guarantee the guardian will act in your best interests. I hung up and stared out my hotel window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my daughter was preparing to convince a judge that the woman who had raised her, worked 2 jobs to pay for her education, and quietly built a fortune through disciplined investing, was too mentally compromised to manage her own life. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Tomorrow, in a courtroom in downtown Thornfield, 30 years of sacrifice would be weighed against 30 seconds of wounded pride, and the outcome would determine whether I remained Delilah Cartwright, financial planner and independent woman, or became a ward of the state, case number 2024 GU 7743. Either way, by tomorrow afternoon, one of us would learn exactly what family loyalty was worth when measured against cold, hard cash. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. I sat beside Joyce, wearing the same navy suit I'd chosen for the restaurant confrontation, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, Rihanna sat with her attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she specialized in getting what she wanted. Judge Patricia Manning entered at exactly 9 a.m., a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of family dysfunction. She reviewed the preliminary documents while we sat in tense silence. "This is a petition for emergency guardianship," Judge Manning said, looking up at Rihanna's attorney. "The allegation is that Mrs. Delilah Cartwright is suffering from cognitive decline and may be the victim of financial exploitation. Ms. Torres, present your case." Elena Torres stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the petitioner is deeply concerned about her mother's recent erratic behavior and suspicious financial activities. Mrs. Cartwright, who has lived paycheck to paycheck her entire adult life, suddenly claims to possess over $2 million in assets. She has become secretive, paranoid, and refuses to explain how she acquired this wealth or who is advising her." Judge Manning turned to me. "Mrs. Cartwright, how do you respond to these allegations?" I stood, feeling Joyce's reassuring presence beside me. "Your Honor, I am not mentally incompetent, and I am not being exploited. The assets in question are the result of 30 years of disciplined investing and financial planning. I have never discussed these investments with my family because they were part of my private retirement planning." "Mrs. Cartwright," Ms. Torres interjected, "can you explain why someone living paycheck to paycheck would hide millions of dollars from their only child?" Joyce stood before I could answer. "Objection, Your Honor. The question assumes facts not in evidence. Mrs. Cartwright was not living paycheck to paycheck. She was living modestly while building substantial retirement savings." Judge Manning nodded. "Sustained. Ms. Torres, please confine yourself to established facts." The hearing continued for nearly an hour. Ms. Torres presented Dr. Pemberton's statement about Rihanna's concerns, character witnesses who testified about my allegedly confused behavior, and financial records showing the sudden appearance of substantial assets in court filings. But Joyce was ready.
She presented 30 years of investment records, documentation of my consistent financial planning, and testimony from Nathan Pierce about my sophisticated understanding of market strategies. Most importantly, she had arranged for an independent psychiatric evaluation that clearly demonstrated my mental competency. The turning point came when Judge Manning asked Rihanna to testify directly. "Miss Hayes, you claim your mother is being financially exploited. Who do you believe is exploiting her?" Rihanna glanced at her attorney before answering. "I believe her financial advisor and attorney have convinced her to hide assets from family members who care about her welfare. And what evidence do you have of this exploitation? She's acting completely different from the woman who raised me. She's secretive, defensive, and making decisions that don't align with her character." Judge Manning leaned forward. "Miss Hayes, is it possible that your mother is acting differently because she's defending herself against accusations of mental incompetence?" The question hung in the air. Rihanna's composure faltered for the first time. I just want what's best for her." "And what do you believe is best for her?" "Professional oversight of her finances to ensure she's not being taken advantage of, even if she objects to such oversight. Even if she objects." Judge Manning made notes before addressing the courtroom. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied." Relief flooded through me so powerfully I nearly collapsed.
However, the judge continued, "I want to address some concerns. Mrs. Cartwright, while you have every right to financial privacy, the sudden revelation of substantial assets after accepting support from family members has understandably caused confusion and concern." I stood. "Your Honor, I never asked for support. I needed temporary housing after losing my job, and my investment strategy has always been to preserve principal while living on income from other sources." "I understand. And Miss Hayes, while your concern for your mother's welfare is commendable, attempting to use the legal system to gain control over another competent adult's finances because you disapprove of their choices is not appropriate." Rihanna's face turned red, but she remained silent. "This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence or financial exploitation. Mrs. Cartwright, you are free to manage your assets as you see fit." As we left the courthouse, Joyce walked beside me while Rihanna and her legal team followed at a distance. "It's over," Joyce said. "They can't file another petition without new evidence of incompetency." But I knew it wasn't really over. Legal victories don't heal broken relationships or undo 30 years of misunderstanding. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, finally allowing myself to process what had happened. I'd won the legal victory, but at the cost of the only family relationship I'd ever prioritized. My phone buzzed with a text from Rihanna. "We need to talk." I ignored it. Over the following weeks, I began building the life I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I bought a small house in Willowbrook, a quiet neighborhood where neighbors watered their gardens and children rode bicycles on tree-lined streets. For the first time in 30 years, I decorated according to my own taste, bought furniture I actually liked, and planned meals based on what I wanted to eat, rather than what I could afford. I understand. And Miss Hayes, while your concern for your mother's welfare is commendable, attempting to use the legal system to gain control over another competent adult's finances because you disapprove of their choices is not appropriate. Rihanna's face turned red, but she remained silent. This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence or financial exploitation. Mrs. Cartwright, you are free to manage your assets as you see fit. As we left the courthouse, Joyce walked beside me while Rihanna and her legal team followed at a distance. "It's over," Joyce said. "They can't file another petition without new evidence of incompetency." But I knew it wasn't really over. Legal victories don't heal broken relationships or undo 30 years of misunderstanding. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, finally allowing myself to process what had happened. I'd won the legal victory, but at the cost of the only family relationship I'd ever prioritized. My phone buzzed with a text from Rihanna. "We need to talk." I ignored it. Over the following weeks, I began building the life I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I bought a small house in Willowbrook, a quiet neighborhood where neighbors watered their gardens and children rode bicycles on tree-lined streets. For the first time in 30 years, I decorated according to my own taste, bought furniture I actually liked, and planned meals based on what I wanted to eat rather than what I could afford. I also started volunteering at the Thornfield Financial Literacy Center, teaching working parents about investment strategies and retirement planning. Many of them reminded me of myself at their age, working multiple jobs and assuming they'd never have enough money to invest. The secret, I told them, isn't making more money. It's deciding that your future self deserves better than just surviving. 3 months after the hearing, Rihanna called. "Mom, I want to apologize." I was gardening when she called, my hands dirty with soil from planting roses I'd always wanted, but never felt I deserved. "For which part?" I asked. "For all of it. For treating you like a burden, for trying to control your money, for assuming I knew better than you about your own life." I sat down on my porch steps, still holding the phone. "What changed your mind?" Trevor and I went to counseling. The therapist helped me understand that I was projecting my own fears about financial security onto you. I was so terrified of not having enough that I couldn't imagine you weren't terrified too. But I wasn't terrified, Rihanna. I was prepared. I know that now. I also know that you earned every dollar through sacrifices I never even noticed. We talked for nearly an hour. She apologized for the guardianship petition, for the years of treating me like I couldn't understand complex financial concepts, for measuring my worth in terms of what I cost rather than what I'd contributed. But apologies, I'd learned, don't automatically repair trust. "I need time," I told her. "This isn't something that gets fixed with one conversation." "I understand. But Mom, I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not just for the money, but for standing up to me when I was wrong." After we hung up, I went back to my roses. The soil was rich and dark, perfect for growing something beautiful. As I worked, I thought about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness was something I could give freely, a gift to myself as much as to her. But reconciliation required rebuilding trust, and trust took time. 6 months later, Rihanna visited my new house. She admired my garden, complimented my decorating choices, and asked genuine questions about my investment strategies. It felt like talking to a stranger who happened to share some of my DNA. But strangers, I learned, sometimes had the potential to become something better than the family members you'd known before. "There's something I want you to understand," I told her as she prepared to leave. "I didn't hide the money to hurt you or test you. I hid it because I learned early that financial independence meant freedom from other people's opinions about what I deserved." "Including yours?" "Especially yours, because your opinion mattered most, and I was terrified you'd see the money as something you were entitled to, rather than something I'd earned." She nodded slowly. "I probably would have." "I know." As she drove away, I stood in my garden watching the sun set behind the trees I'd planted. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't planning my next decision around someone else's needs or expectations. I wasn't measuring my worth in terms of what I could provide or how little space I took up. I was simply Delilah Cartwright, a woman who'd worked hard, saved wisely, and finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued.
To anyone listening who's ever been underestimated by people who thought they knew your whole story, remember this. Their assumptions about your limitations say more about them than about you. Don't shrink yourself to fit their narrow expectations.
Don't apologize for being more capable, more prepared, or more successful than they imagined possible. And if they can't celebrate your victories without trying to control them, maybe it's time to build a life where your worth isn't measured by their approval. You don't owe anyone access to your accomplishments, explanations for your choices, or apologies for taking up the space you've earned. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people who've underestimated you is the chance to see exactly how wrong they've been. Whether they choose to learn from that revelation is entirely up to them.